role that contracting officers play in the buying process. And so in all of my content, those of you who follow me, and I hope some of you who will, I talk about the players at 5 different layers. And so, Kevin, contracting officers, what do they do? What do they not do?
So I love how we all have these metaphors to help us kind of understand these concepts. And so the way that we describe what the contracting officer does is we call it the 3 deciders. So imagine there's a triangle. One of the deciders is the economic decider. They're the one that funds the requirement. That if you go up high enough, that's Congress, but usually that's our program manager, that's the user, right? Then on the other side is the customer. That's the second side. That's the one who needs the equipment, the body armor, etc. The bottom side of the triangle, that's the contracting officer. They're responsible for how to buy the thing that the economic decider funded and the customer wants. So the contracting officer doesn't have any money. Economic decider does. The contracting officer doesn't have a requirement. The customer does. But what the contracting officer has is the how. And so when you understand, okay, what I'm missing is the how, now I know I need to engage with the contracting officer. I need to start thinking about what's the contracting officer working through. And by the way, the how, the fancy word for that is acquisition strategy. Are you using a GSA schedule? Are you using a GPC card? Are you using an IDIQ? Are you doing a sole source? That's the how, right? That's their job. But what they're not going to do is say, oh yeah, it's not their requirement. It's their customer's requirement. It's not their money. It's their economic deciders' money. It's their agency's money. And so and you hear me getting it. Go ahead.
I like the way you expressed it a moment ago. The contracting officer's customer is also you as a vendor, is also your customer. When I talk about the end user layer, I'm talking about the people from program manager to warrior in the battle space to tier 1 help desk personnel. They're the person who is stuck with the day-to-day consequences of choosing you. And they have a lot to say about what that requirement is, but they heave that requirement over the wall to contracting. And so the relationships, you have critical relationships that you need, not only with the contracting officer, but if you're pursuing the contracting officer hot and heavy and you have minimal or no relationships in the end user layer, the people you work shoulder to shoulder with in the account every day, then you're not as likely to be successful. So Kevin, what do contracting officers look for in vendors? And what they're looking for may be different from what the end user layer is looking for.
So the biggest one is, do you solve the problem? I don't. I'm gonna speak in specificity, but this may sound mean, but I don't care that you're a small business. I don't care that I don't care about your story. Can you solve my problem? Once I know you can solve the problem, then I may care about the story, because it's part of the argument of, yes, I look at your past performance, all that kind of stuff. But you can hear me, getting animated, and because I can remember so many times contractors would come to me with, hey, I have this solution. That's not what I buy. In some cases, it wasn't even what my agency bought. When I worked at Special Operations Command, they would say, hey, we've got this really cool system that can help you keep you safer on a fixed wing jet. SOCOM didn't buy fixed wing. They buy fixed wing aircraft. They may buy a few jets here and there. But what he's talking about was an Air Force solution, right? Which is the job I had before SOCOM. So simple things like that. What do you solve the problem that my customer has? So that's the first thing I'm looking for. The second thing is, again, these are business principles. These are principles that put aside the FAR, put aside the FAR overhaul, put aside all the turbulence, but these are principles that apply. The second thing is credibility. I actually use the term of, don't be all icing and no cake, meaning that you have, hey, I have a great website, I have a great story, but I don't have any evidence that I've done this. And here's an example of something that I want to use the word fundamental, but it sounds a lot. Fundamentally changed in how the FAR is structured right now. FAR Part 1, the old version from 3 months ago, said contracting officers shall use past performance. It didn't use those exact words, but that's basically what it said. You shall look at past performance. Now, what it says, you shall assess how well they can do the job. The phrase past performance does not even show up in the new FAR Part 1. Is that good or bad for you? Well, it depends. Welcome to the thinking part of the job here, right? But for the purposes of, I want to know, can you do the work? Show me you've done this work in some way, whether it's commercially or was it 6 years ago? Was it 3 years ago? I don't know. But the FAR used to require what they call that recent and relevant. We've all seen that in source selection evaluation criteria. As a contracting officer reading the new FAR, and we're all reading it, we're all absorbing this new thing, there is no reference in FAR Part 1 to past performance. Now, keep in mind, we're in the messy middle. There's a lot more of the FAR to be picked up. They may invent a past performance section for all we know, right? There's reserved parts they may use for that. We don't know. That's why it's the messy middle. But what we have right now, if you're one of those, I think there's 24 agencies that have picked up FAR Part 1, now contracting officers are not required to evaluate past performance. Why is that a huge deal? And why does it make sense? Because if you're selling a commercial item and you've sold that commercial item for 20 years in the private sector, why do I need to have 3 years of past performance at the government? Logically think that through. Now, if you're the incumbent who has those 3 years of past performance, you're a little miffed because you just lost an advantage. But these are the puzzles to be thinking about now. Like these are the principles of how do I show I have credibility with the contracting officer, or actually, I'm rephrase it, to the contracting officer. You're having credibility with your customer because they're the ones that knows that you know what you're doing. But you have to have credibility that you can show to the contracting officer. One of the ways is past performance. The other way might be your brand. It might be the amount of data available about you on LinkedIn. Who knows? They're going to use lots of different ways.
What about the concept of showing that you are the low risk choice? How important is showing to the contracting officer not just that you can do the job, but you're going to be the best choice for low risk and high performance of the mission?
So we did a podcast episode. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it was on performance risk. And to help the analogy make sense, I used when you buy insurance, there are three basic elements when you're buying an insurance policy. There's what it costs, there's what it covers, and there's whether or not it'll get paid. Take those three elements, like, because you care about those. You can buy really cheap insurance with lots of coverage that you may not actually ever see any money from. Or you can pay a lot for insurance and know that a top tier insurance company is going to pay you for it, right? That's the feeling that's your risk that you're talking about. Is as a contracting officer, I know that there's a price I'm going to pay, there's coverage that you have, and then what's the risk of you actually performing? And when you use that insurance metaphor, all of a sudden, as a private citizen, as a contractor, as a human, you as an insurance buyer, you feel it because you're like, oh. If the contracting officer just thinks I'm cheap, but he doesn't think I'm actually going to perform, that's bad for me. That's like being the fly-by-night insurance company. That's how I'm perceived, right? So be aware of that because you're absolutely right, Judy. That performance risk of if I give you this contract, what's going to happen? And from a customer perspective, the worst thing that can happen is you don't get the solution and they cancel my contract, like what just happened with the DoD moving contract they just canceled, right? And the contracting officer, worst case scenario, I got to do this all over again. I went through this whole source selection. I made this big acquisition strategy. I awarded this contract to you, and you're not even doing the work. Crap! I got to do it all over again. Neither of those are good, and so that's the risk we're talking about.
Got it. Well, so the contracting officer is not the only person you need a relationship with. Who else do government contractors need to influence, have relationships with in the buying process?
Mostly, going back to that triangle, mostly the customer. I would say the relationship, like with your layers, Judy, the relationship with the customer, start there. Like we have all kinds of training talking about, like, because again, the contracting officer doesn't have the requirement. They don't have any money. So if you convince them you're awesome, that's only somewhat useful if the money and the requirements show up, right? Whereas if the customer knows they can do this work. Like, remember I said credibility with the customer so they can show that to the contracting officer. These prepositions really matter. And understanding how this process works, start with the customer. Start with the people who are looking for the solution. Like when you go to conferences, a lot of times the users are there. The people who come up to your booth, they aren't contracting officers, they're users. They're the people who have the need. You want to build relationships with them to show, yes, we can actually do this. Because what you want to have happen is when the contracting officer starts looking, they say, hey, here's a company that can do this. When we compete it, let's make sure that we get an RFI from them or an RFI response from them.
Got it.